But I want to tell you one other story, because it's obviously easy to feel terribly sorry for these two sisters and what they've gone through. But I went later to a prison in Duhok in Iraqi Kurdistan to meet a 16-year-old suicide bomber who belonged to ISIS. So an ISIS, whatever, jihadist warrior who had been captured by the Kurdish troops before he could detonate his suicide vest. And the conversation I had with this young man, whose name was Ahmed al-Khatib, was absolutely unforgettable. So they bring the prisoner for the interview, and he has a baby face. He's 16 years old. So I ask him why he joined Daesh, and he gives me this speech about, his so-called Islamic ideology. There is only one Allah, and we must kill the enemies of Islam. And you look at this 16-year-old, and he has absolutely no idea what he's talking about. He's been brainwashed. He's a train wreck of poverty, shame, humiliation, violence. He came from a small town in Syria, Deir ez-Zur, and you can imagine how this young man was given, a weapon, a key to an SUV, and an ideology that glorified his cruelty against others to some sort of, divine act.
And glorified his martyrdom.
Exactly. Yeah. And he's sitting there in prison.
For him to die and kill essentially innocent people.
But the incredible thing about the story is after our interview was finished, and I could see that this same baby-faced 16-year-old in another context would have slit my throat and killed me. So I was ever aware of how dangerous, in fact, he was. But then after our interview, the prison guards came to take him back to his cell. I said, do you have anything to say? Do you have any last words? And he looks back at me and says, I miss my mother. I miss my mother. This vicious, dangerous 16-year-old suicide bomber who has lost both the glory of martyrdom and been deprived of his freedom, remembers the one primordial bond that no one can forget, which is the bond with his mother. And he says, I wanted to go to medical school and become a doctor. And it made me think what made Ahmed the healer into Ahmed the killer. And you begin to understand that even he is the victim perpetrator. That in another world, I don't know, he would have been, texting his girlfriend on his, iPhone. And that's the randomness of the extremes that we have in the world, which brings me back to the question of, why him and not me? Why do I have all of these privileges and opportunities, whereas someone else was born into a culture of violence and corruption and desperation? So we really have an immense responsibility to use the opportunities and platforms that we have for the betterment of humankind, because there's immense suffering out there. And until you don't feel and touch that suffering, you will not take seriously your own responsibility.
Well, I think what you have just mentioned is perhaps the greatest spiritual lesson at the core of your work, which is in the modern world, it is very, very easy to be out of touch with the suffering of others. It's very easy to be out of touch with the suffering of hundreds of millions of people.
The Soul Boom Podcast. Subscribe now on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you get your stupid podcasts.